As an experimental piece, James, Jacob and I created this short film Uncanned. In this video I will be evaluating and explaining my work in terms of camera movement, lighting and editing. It's important to remember that an audience is viewing the story entirely through the camera, and therefore any camera movement will affect the way an audience views the scene. The camera movement in Uncanned mainly consists of dolly shots and static tripod tilts. This is because it's difficult to involve too much camera movement when the on-screen action is mostly stationary. In this shot, and the beginning's establishing shot, we use a removed stationary tripod to create a more sinister or unnerving feel to the shot. The empty space around the actors highlights their isolation and also anticipates the mood of the film. As my character opens up in her story, we move to a handheld camera. This jerky footage adds an uneasiness to the scene, reflecting her mental instability and even adding tension to the film. The slow dolly into our main character punctuates her sadness, making the audience feel uncomfortable by forcing them closer towards the subject. This highlights the extent of her deeply rooted issues. Furthermore, by bringing the audience closer towards her, they are given very little choice as to whether they become emotionally invested in her story. Equally, we use a zoom out at the end of the film to remove the audience from the action. My final point for how we use camera movement for effect in our film is actually through the lack of it. By creating kinetic energy throughout the majority of the film, the break in motion in the shots such as these emphasises the significance of action on the screen. Another interesting point to talk about in regards to our film is our use of lighting, or rather how we learned the importance of properly lighting a set. My criticism of Uncanned is that the footage is generally too dark, and therefore some of the emotion that could be there is lost in the shadowed eyes. At times I noticed myself straining my eyes to see the action that I knew was there but just couldn't be seen because the scene was so dark. Nevertheless, this is why we chose to make a preliminary film, to test out lighting, camera techniques and editing before going to the final piece after hours. We aim to learn from our mistakes, and therefore if I chose to refilm this video I'd use a softbox to diffuse filling light into the scene. This would soften the dark shadows that fall across the actors' faces. Additionally, instead of shining light on the actors' faces directly or bouncing light off of the ceiling to give a top lighting effect, which made the hair look very bright but the eyes look very dark, I choose to bounce light off of the walls or the floor to create a more evenly distributed light flow on the actors' faces. Another technique I'd use when refilming this scene would be to use a camera lens with a lower ISO. When you use a higher ISO you get more noise in the recording, and although it isn't too bad in Uncanned, we could have used a 50mm lens with an f-stop of 1.8 instead of a 24 to 70mm lens with an f-stop of 2.8. Another thing I'd change if I was to re-record this piece would be to add eyelight in. Now, eyelight sounds like a silly thing, but really adds a lot of detail and emotion into the character's expressions. If you look at some of our shots, you can see how the light bounces off of the water in the eye, and this adds a lot more emotion into the expression. However, I think this light intensity could have been increased to exaggerate this emotion further. The way to do this would have been to shine a torch as close to the actor as possible without shining it directly in their face. This would have brightened up the eye area and given the audience more of an idea where the actor was looking at that point. Lastly, the editing in our film goes further than just using simple cuts to move the action forward. Although these things that I'm about to mention may have gone unnoticed, that's the beauty in editing, you're not supposed to notice it. Firstly, I will talk about cutting on action. If you don't know what I mean about this, it looks something like that. Cutting on action means that you're cutting between two shots where the subject is still doing the same thing. In this case, our actress Paula matches the two shots by taking a clipboard out of her bag. Additionally, cutting on action can refer to two shots which are joined together by the same piece of speech, just like this one.
Does anybody have anything they'd like to share today?
Another name for this is a sound bridge. A technique that we used to show the main character's flashbacks in the supermarket was a crosscut or a cutaway. This allows us to get in the head of the main character and also ramps up the tension of the scene. A cutaway is where you cut to a different location or shot, whereas a crosscut cuts from this different shot to the original shot and then back again. Additionally, in this scene we use a match cut of my hand grabbing the basket and grabbing the chair to help move the action forward. This looks something like this. Nonetheless, my favourite piece of editing in Uncanned is by far our use of a smash cut.
And I brought it down real hard on his head. Screamed, "Would you kindly move?"
A smash cut is where you cut together a very loud and a very quiet piece of footage to contrast each other. In this particular case, it shows our main character's insanity coming further and further out of her shell. This works to make the audience feel more uncomfortable in the on-screen action and also heightens the tension of the film. So yeah, that's a quick analysis and evaluation of how we use camera movement, sound and editing in Uncanned to help tell the story. I hope this video has been helpful and interesting. Thanks again.